shaping the rest of this session, but also for future courses. So please do fill it out. Now onto the webinar. Briefly about Dr. Joshi. As many of you know, Amit Joshi is a professor at IMD of Digital Marketing and Strategy with extensive expertise in marketing management, strategy, advertising, digital media, data analytics, and marketing accountability. He's also program director of the open program Digital Analytics, a busy man. Previously, he was an award-winning professor and researcher at the University of Central Florida. Amit has also interacted with a variety of corporate clients in several industries, including telecom, media, manufacturing, retailing, education, automobiles. On a personal note, may I add that he, along with this course, have been extremely popular with our online executive education group over the past few course offerings, and that probably more than anything gives me even greater privilege to turn this over to Dr. Joshi, and welcome, and we look forward to all of your questions, comments, and feedback throughout the session. Dr. Joshi?
Thank you, Dave. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you for the support team for setting this up. Thank you, all of you, for taking the time to actually be on this webinar. So here's the plan. I'm going to start off with just a couple of words on some latest developments in terms of artificial intelligence that I was lucky enough to be privy to, and then I'm going to open it up for your questions and thoughts and comments and so on and so forth. And I really wanted to kick off because just a week or two ago, so I spent about 4 days in San Francisco. And I was very lucky because the purpose of this visit was to actually go to the Valley, San Francisco Bay Area, and find out exactly what is the cutting edge occurrence in artificial intelligence, what the best of the best, you know, the usual suspect companies, what those folks are doing in terms of artificial intelligence, what are the recent developments, what are some setbacks, what are they doing? So in the process, I happened to visit, you know, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Microsoft, IBM, Stanford University, University of California at Berkeley. I met, you know, some of the top AI research scientists in the world, including a gentleman called Michael Jordan, not the basketball player, but the AI scientist who's equally famous in science as the basketball player is. Absolute genius, is one of the godfathers of artificial intelligence. And it was really an honor to meet all of these people. And one of the things that actually a couple of things that I came away with, right? So the first thing that I came away with is that a lot of companies are doing a lot of research in terms of artificial intelligence and, you know, extending the boundaries of what we can do with AI, but the applications are slightly slower to catch up. So taking stuff from lab to the common public, to actually seeing that commercialized is taking longer than a lot of people anticipated. Secondly, amongst all of these companies, of all of these, the one that I felt was probably the most cutting edge in terms of artificial intelligence, and this is probably not going to come as a surprise, was actually Waymo. Waymo is the self-driving car arm of Google, as most of you might know. The reason why I felt Waymo was ahead of the game compared to the others is because they're just solving a problem that's so difficult to solve, right? Driving a car alongside humans, at least as well as humans, actually much better than humans at a superhuman level, is an incredibly hard problem to solve. So how are these guys doing it? Interestingly enough, these folks are doing it using a combination of standard age-old computer science techniques and artificial intelligence. So I actually managed to meet with the product manager for Waymo, who's in charge of Arizona, where they're actually testing out most of the cars. So you might know that Phoenix was the test market, the first test market in the world for like a complete self-driving Waymo car. There might be people sitting inside it or not, but the car actually offers you rides. You can hail it from a Waymo app. It'll show up at your doorstep with nobody inside it, and it'll drop you off somewhere, again, with no human beings inside it besides you. So anyway, so the reason why these folks need to do all of this is because they say, you know what, even today, we are not certain that we can get AI to learn in the right way. And the example he gave me saying, look, we always want a car to stop at a red light. This is not rocket science. This is pretty straightforward. If we use traditional artificial intelligence and the machine or the system learns by observing what human drivers are doing, Well, it could happen that some crazy people are actually jumping the red light. We don't want to risk the AI learning that it's okay to once in a while jump the red light. So in that sense, we are not using AI for that part of the application. That part of the application is programmed in the old-fashioned way. If red light, then stop. Okay? But a lot of the other things that they're trying to do with cars simply cannot be programmed using the very traditional if-then kinds of loops. And that's where they're really using some insane cutting-edge AI techniques, which are straight from the lab into application. So it was an absolutely fascinating insight into how AI is getting used, the real cutting edge. And hopefully I'll continue to keep learning more about this amazing field, which continues to change all the time. Literally every week, this thing is changing, and that's what really fascinates me about being involved in this particular field. With that particular spiel, hopefully I whetted your appetite. So I'd like to open it up. Please fire away with your questions, your thoughts, your comments on the course so far. AI, data analytics, everything that you've done so far, happy to address.
Dr. Joshi, if our students are going to be shy, I'm going to interject with a question or a prompt. I know one of our participants in particular is geared toward the healthcare sector, and a lot of the discussions we've had in office hours have talked about the emergence of data analytics, AI, machine learning as it sort of veers toward the predictive and prescriptive sides, but also then looking at both the technological limitations, but also some of the ethical considerations and privacy laws, or privacy considerations, I should say, when you're dealing with such a personal or intimate business. So I know we'd love to hear some of your commentary. I think some questions are starting to roll in anyway, but if you want to retreat back to the healthcare point at any point, I know the group would be appreciative.
So let me kick it off by actually addressing that. One of the things that one of the things that I did hear quite frequently discussed, especially by employees at the companies that I visited, so Facebook, Google, and so on and so forth, Microsoft, IBM, was the issue of ethics, which is where do we draw the line? You might have read or you might have heard that Microsoft, for example, drew the line at weapons, and there was a huge Microsoft project with the Pentagon, which its own employees refused to serve on, and they made Microsoft pull out of that. Similar stories at Google. So at an individual level, a lot of the employees at these firms are taking a stance for privacy, for security. They're being very, very careful with the kinds of things they prefer to work on. A lot of work around the ethics of AI that we are beginning to see. Here is the catch, however. If you look at the organizations themselves, so far what we are seeing is they're still willing to sacrifice privacy and security for profits. Okay, so this is the unfortunate truth, but this is what we have seen so far. I hope it will change. But what we have seen so far is, if I can get your medical records, but I can make a little bit money off of it, I know it's slightly unethical, but it's making me an extra dime. Organizations seem to be okay with that kind of a paradigm. I hope it changes. It's a very scary thing to occur, because quite honestly, even from the perspective of the organizations, it's a very, very slippery slope, right? If I'm in the insurance business and I want to use data analytics to improve my risk profiling of you, I would really like to know if you smoke. Of course, I should know if you smoke. But then where do you draw the line? Do I really want to also know if you ski? Because, if you ski, chances are, you're going to have a higher chance of injury. If you skydive, right? If you indulge in certain kind of, behavior in terms of drinking or eating, What about if you've got certain genetic predispositions? I'm from India. I have a huge predisposition towards diabetes. You know, should the insurance industry be allowed to, type my genome to find out if I have a higher propensity for diabetes? Where is the line between knowing that I smoke versus knowing that I have a higher propensity for diabetes? Where do we draw the line? The answers to these questions are not super clear, right? So far, we are okay with some things, we are not okay with others, but it's shifting sands all the time. So thanks, Dave, for bringing that up. It's a wonderful question. It's not something we have yet resolved. It's something that's very much a work in progress, right? So
No,
with
and
that,
we talk about that as a real, as both a benefit and a challenge when it comes to teaching a course like this, because you have real-time involvement of the subject matter, as well as real-time interest and professional involvement from the part of the student. So both sides are moving quickly. All right, I think if you look at both the chat and the Q&A, we're seeing it start to light up. So I'll retreat and let the students take over.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so let's see what we have here. IoT, IoE. Yeah, so SSTL, thank you very much for the question. So you are in part getting answering your own question, right? So IoT is a huge funnel for the data that's coming in, which is required to train a lot of the AI. Now, one of the biggest issues with AI today still is the large volumes of data that is required to train it. Now, having said that, one of the developments that I learned about is the scientists are working on AI that is going to require much, much, much smaller amounts of data for training. It's still not commercialized, but we'll get there. As of now, we need tons of data. IoT, IoE is one place where a lot of the data is coming in. However, the role of IoT is twofold, right? On the one hand, it acts as a data funnel, taking data from the consumer side or perhaps from the machine side and feeding it into the model, which can be used to train the model. But it can also be used for the reverse transaction. Let's remember that. You can also use IoTs and sensors to actually control the very devices that are giving out the data. So simple example, if I've got an aircraft engine, flying 40,000 feet up in the air, I've got all kinds of sensors on it. The sensors are continually feeding me data. Using those data, I can build all kinds of wonderful models on the optimal operational level of that particular engine. But what I can then do is, based off of that, I can feed back to the engine and say, you know what, right now the temperature outside is X, the humidity is Y, you're flying at this particular altitude, you're running at 100,000 RPM. If instead of 100, you run at 95,000 RPM, the amount of fuel that you will consume might be 10% less. And there's no change in the amount of power that you really put out. So those kinds of two-way controls are also possible with IoT, which is why it's so exciting. It's funny you should ask that. I spent this entire morning doing a session for ABB, which is one of the world's biggest industrial companies. And this is IoT was one of the things that we were actually discussing and how you could put this in this particular context. So I hope that addresses your question, dear. All right, Lela has a question. So Lela, here's my thought, right? In terms of AI, in terms of bias and gender and gender, race, religion, and all those things, AI it depends on how you train it. If you train AI using examples that we have coded in ourselves, we will probably transfer some of our biases into the AI. Okay, so for instance, if we want to train AI to understand who is at risk of loan default and who is not. Say I'm a bank, I really want to find out, if I make a loan to this person, is this person going to pay me back? This is a classic AI classification problem. AI is going to be much better at this than a human being, right? So I use lots of my old data, all my old loans to train the AI to do this. How do I do this? Well, I label the data. I have all the loan applications, and then I say, okay, this is the loan that defaulted, this is the loan that did not. Well, obviously that data will have gender, race, and other kinds of religion kinds of information. And it's possible that AI says, people of this particular race, this particular gender, this particular skin color are more likely to default. AI does not know gender, but it's just finding a pattern. What we've done here is we've transmitted some of our bias into AI. On the flip side, what could happen is using some of the newer techniques, we can just have AI learn itself. So we don't really tell AI, hey, look at race, look at gender, look at religion, and see if that matters for default of loans. We say, hey, here are some things, figure out what's causing default. AI might come up on its own. Now, the good news is it may not have the same biases as us. The bad news is it might have its own biases, right? It might come up with some things that we can never actually even find out. It might say, hey, you know what? Anyone who fills up the loan application form before 4 o'clock in the evening actually has a higher chance of default. Who knows what that really means? But my point is, there will always be some bias. We will never have AI that's completely free of bias. What we've got to understand, what we've got to decide is, what kind of bias are we okay with? Okay, are we okay with the existing human biases that we have being fed into AI, or we are not okay with existing human biases? We want to put a stop to them, but we are in a sense okay with whatever bias AI comes up with on its own. All right, and that's where a lot of the discussion is. But it's a very, very good question. Right, Felipe has something as well. So the car industry, the self-driving car industry, is like you said, probably the most advanced when it comes to AI. Medical applications is one where it's really taking huge steps forward. A lot of back office in terms of operations research, supply chain management and operations research. And this is stuff that you and I, unless we are working in that industry, you and I will not see because it's not visible on the street. If you see a self-driving car, you can see it on the street, right? But if somebody is using AI to improve their warehouse facilities, you and I are not going to see it unless we visit the warehouse or unless we work over there. Huge amount of AI-related work going on in those kinds of industries. Now, the work in AI that's going on in those things is very different from what's happening with the self-driving car. A lot of work in that industry is about improving things that are already good enough. So I already have predictions for my supply chain, for my inventory, my purchasing, which are, I don't know, 85% accurate using human beings. I use AI and go from 85 to 92% accuracy perhaps, right? It doesn't sound like a massive change. It's not going to change the world. However, think about it from the perspective of the companies involved. Okay, if you're talking about a 20, 30, $50 billion company, this change in inventory is, or this change in efficiency is a huge difference to what they can do, to the kinds of profits they can make, to their resources and so on and so forth. So that's that's an industry where this is getting used a lot. Now, to the second part of your question, which is a time frame to consider it mature. With the automobile industry, I would consider maturity when I actually start seeing self-driving cars out on the street. My personal timetable for that, based on what I know, is I don't see that happen. Okay, let me break that down. So technologically, I think we can get there in 5 to 10 years, which is actually having a fully automated self-driving car, a level 5 self-driving car, as they call it, technologically. Legally, socially, commercially, economically, that's a completely different question. My guess is 20 to 25 years for that. Because even if the technology is available for 5 years, we need new laws before we can actually put that car out on the street. We need to understand who's going to pay insurance if that car hits someone. Who's responsible for the safety of the passengers who are seated inside the cars? What kind of infrastructure do we need around to have those cars running on our streets? How do those cars interact with other non-self-drive? Millions of questions. Those are going to be much harder questions to solve. Technically, we will get there much faster. So that's the address to your question. On the cars itself, a lot of the other technology is already pretty mature in terms of if you want some basic level of prediction and so on and so forth. Lots and lots of companies, fintech industries, heavily investing in using AI to address some of these issues. For example, mergers and acquisitions. It's a huge part of what some of these big banks, Goldman Sachs, UBS, those kinds of folks do. Goldman Sachs has realized that about half of all the activities that go into an M&A, they can turn over to AI. They don't need human beings for that, right? So those kinds of things we already started seeing, so we can already say they're mature in those industries. So I hope that addresses the question, Felipe. This is wonderful. Please keep your questions coming.
I mentioned this in the chat, but I'll say it again verbally. Because of the summertime, especially August, we have our group is about 15 to 20% of the size that it is during the year, and
that's understandable.
Yeah, and that poses a huge advantage though for anyone involved in the discussion. So I do encourage you to ask your questions, submit your feedback. When we do this during the year, we end up not getting either getting to the final slew of questions very quickly, or not being able to get to those final couple. So take advantage of the time of year in the group, and especially as we know that all of you are involved in industries where the data analytics is really just evolving quickly, and you become data ambassadors for your organizations, or data analytics ambassadors for your organizations. And hopefully what we're covering in this course is helpful to you on that front, interacting with us or with each other.
Absolutely agree with what Dave's saying. So using AI to predict the chance of error depends on the industry. So what you're talking about is the accuracy of predictions that AI can basically give and how that compares to human. There is some material in sciences. If you're really interested in technical material, you should look up Archive, ARXIV. That's the place where most of the latest AI research lands up. It's called Archive, but it's written ARXIV. So if you just Google ARXIV, you'll come to that. And depending on the industry, depending on the type of AI, the errors can vary. Either which way, the errors that AI makes on a given application are significantly smaller than the errors that humans will make on the exact same application, right? And that's really the comparison point we need to find out. It's not comparing the errors with zero or the ideal, but it's comparing it to what humans will do. So there's a ton of published material, but that depends on the industry. Absolutely. To use AI to identify the probability of error made by human tasks. So if a human were doing the task, what would be the chance of error? I don't know if, I'm not aware of any such paper like that. Does not mean it does not exist, it's just that I'm not aware of anything like that. Yeah, no, I can't take, I suspect if I had to look for something like this, I would look for it in the medical field, because that's where every error made by a human being is extremely costly. And we might actually have AI to predict the probability of a human making an error. Yeah, so that's where my mind goes to think we might actually see something like that. But again, I'm not aware of something like this. Okay, let's see what Leila has to say. Yeah. Yes, so Leila, we have to be careful about this a little bit, right? I think especially if you're sitting anywhere in the West, United States, Europe, and so on and so forth, all of us really seem to be in love, and I seem to be in love with the concept of privacy and security. And I think that's a good thing. I really think that's a good thing that we honor the fact that privacy is important, even when data is so valuable. If you flip the script and look at what's happening in the East and China, for example, they really are not as concerned about privacy. Okay, so the kinds of AI-related developments, whether it's in advertising, whether it's in medical field or whatever, that are happening can be very, very different across these two parts of the world, quite simply because in the East, you might have significantly greater access to data because of lack of privacy compared to what is out so in the West. Now, having said that, with programmatic advertising, if you're in marketing, which I assume you are based off of your question, you probably know what programmatic advertising is, which is end-to-end, the whole system being run by an automated system, right from the fact of what ad should I run, what should be the creative, where should I run the ad, how long should I run it. After it has run, I take feedback from how many people have actually clicked on the ad or seen the ad, modify where I put the ad, and complete that particular feedback. Programmatic advertising, right? We're already seeing massive steps in terms of the capabilities of programmatic advertising. I was working with a startup in Singapore while I was there a month or so ago that does exactly this. This is a startup founded by a few ex-Googlers. And what they're doing is simply incredible. Just to give you an example, they were working on a project where in a very large and famous company said, we would like you to help us get our app installed in Malaysia, I think it was. Okay. And this particular company was paying an advertising agency $14 per installation of their app. I mean, this is a very crowded market in Malaysia, so it was a very competitive thing to have their app installed. I cannot tell you what industry it is, but I can just assure you that it was very, very competitive. So for every app that needed to be installed, they ended up paying $14 to this advertising company. These guys, using artificial intelligence, machine learning, and this programmatic advertising, were able to achieve 10,000 installations in 3 months, which was the target, for $2.80. Okay, so this is the kind of change that AI can bring about. This is simply not possible using the traditional techniques and using the traditional methods. So, so when you talk about backlash, when you talk about privacy, this is what companies are struggling with. I mean, if you have your own organization and you're debating between $14 versus $3, and the cost of that difference is privacy, at some point of time, you're going to say, you know what, I got to make a profit. And that's where we are today. I agree. I mean, there's a lot of polarization that goes on, right? It's a very, very polarizing topic. People are always, and rightfully so, they're concerned about privacy and so on and so forth. But there's there's a lot of machine learning that's already being used, which we don't see on a day-to-day basis. I mean, Amazon is one of the biggest users. They've been using these techniques since the 90s, but they use it all in back office. We don't see it front-facing, I mean, unless we are using Alexa or something like that. We normally don't see it, so we are just not aware of it. But all of these guys are using these techniques to some level or the other. Absolutely 100%. And there's a lot of good that's come off it, without a question.
Dr. Joshi, I was just doing some digging around just as part of my sort of morning read, and there was an article that came out about 2 months ago in Tech Republic magazine, which looks like a niche or specialty publication. And they talked about the 6 6 current business use cases for AI and machine learning now. And I thought that might be an interesting way to just break it down. If you wanted to comment, I mean, this is obviously according to their polling, and I talk to my students in office hours all the time to be wary of anything that's published usually has a sales pitch behind it, or usually has a consulting firm pitching for its services, or perhaps a software service provider pitching its services or products. So with all the grains of salt in the world, but perhaps I thought it might be a guideline for a few minutes if you wanted to sort of, I just put it in the chat box as far as listing according to, again, this company in Tech Republic magazine, which again is a niche industry publication. But yeah, the moral of the story was there's more AI. It's exactly what you just said about Amazon in the 90s. There's more AI and machine learning in business than we think. And here are the use cases that we're seeing. And I'll let you sort of go into this as a guide, and feel free to, as I said, take it or leave it. Many grains of salt involved.
Thanks for that. So in my opinion, actually, there's just 3 use cases for AI, right? Or I'll correct myself. There's 3 categories of use cases for AI today. It's automation, inference, and interaction. I mean, I understand these are massive fields in themselves, but nonetheless, these are the 3 areas where we're seeing AI getting. So automation is things like robotic process automation and robots and so on and so forth, which automate standard processes. Inference is actually finding out more about customers. So you're using data, you running automated data analysis, kind of like what might be happening for programmatic advertising. And interaction obviously is things like Siri and Alexa and Google Home talking to us, speech recognition, natural language processing, text to speech, speech to text, those kinds of things. So broadly speaking, these are the 3 areas. Now within those areas, the area that has made the most progress in the last 5 years or so, and which quite simply without true machine learning was impossible, is speech, language. There is no way we could have cracked language in any way, not even 10% of language, unless we had artificial intelligence. Right? And today we can do language almost as well as a human can. So in terms of understanding what someone is saying, replying, text to speech, speech to text, we are as good, nearly as good as a human. Not for every language on the planet, but for the major languages on the planet. This simply would not have been possible without AI. Right? So in my opinion, there's 3 broad categories of use cases. But that's an interesting angle.
No, and I guess we see it in the popular culture too. Or in the sort of popular or consumer level applications too. Once speech was cracked, you then have the Siris and Alexas and the GPS programs, and it just become. And now we see with Google. I mean, I see millennials traveling with Google Translate, literally just holding their devices up to signs for that instant interpretation.
Exactly. I mean, it's become second nature. You don't even think about it now. Absolutely. And it's still, I mean, let's understand it. It's not perfect. I mean, it's not going to write Shakespeare for us, but it's definitely good enough that we can survive in a foreign country where we know nothing. Absolutely. Absolutely.
How much also do you think that has to do with, and this just veers tangential into my areas of offline teaching, but how much do you think this has to do with the fact that English has become a lingua franca of the commercial world, and that conversational English, in other words, grammatically poor but clearly understandable conversational English, is one of the easier languages to adopt? And again, it does not mean because of the complexity of grammar and spelling rule exceptions. There's a level that most native-born speakers aren't able to adopt, but in the sense that there is this acceptance of conversational, imperfect conversational English as a global second language. Do you think that's helped the speech recognition world a bit?
Immensely. I mean, look, like we discussed, right? This is a game. So there's some cool algorithms at the back end, but this is a game of data volume. And guess which language we have the most volume of data on? I mean, it's not rocket science, right? So English is out there, and then followed by Chinese and Spanish, and the usually highly spoken languages are the ones we've cracked in terms of speech and text. So without a question, the fact that English happens to be the language of the commercial world across the planet has hugely helped it, which is why even today it's really hard to find AI that can crack, for example, I'm speaking of this from experience, Afrikaans, for example. It's hard to cross about a 70% accuracy threshold for Afrikaans, even today. English, we have crossed 98, 99%. Okay, and that is a massive level of difference. I mean, right? I mean, if you want to use this for a commercial application, 99% is good enough. You can just leave it alone and it'll run in most of the cases. 70% means just collapses even in a single speech. It's useless. So it's a massive change, and it's because of the sheer volume of speakers. Felipe, to your point, we do indeed have a top 10 that are selected by my model, and I have shared it with the organizers, and I will request them that they share that with you. So this is for the exercise where they've got to select the 10 best indicators from the 100. I believe I did share the top indicators with you in the last iteration. So
yes,
we can
we'll get that out. I think the course gods were determining that we wanted to wait until after the assignment was due, but now we're completely after the due date.
Yeah,
and again, it's not about a black and white answer so much as it's about it's about the take from Dr. Joshi. So and a lot of people are interested in exactly for that. And I should say, for those watching this, on the recording, just to clarify, we're not advocating pro or against English being the lingua franca of the business community. We're talking about the tendency of conversational English to gear toward the amount of data that's available in conversational English. Let the languages fly where they fly.
And again, this comes from a non-native English speaker myself. So my mother tongue is Marathi. I'm from the west of India. So yeah.
But it is when we talk, and again, this is more into the business communication sphere, but it is. Has been an interesting development on a number of fronts, and there have been an interesting number of derivatives on a number of fronts, but this is one of them with when you have the AI and machine learning component.
Yep.
All right, so I've been waiting for your biotech and pharma questions. Go ahead.
Here we go. So the valid question. So specifically in the pharma biotech industry, in my opinion, so far the biggest factor that has held back implementation has been regulation. Number one, it's not even close. And to a certain extent, it's understandable. I mean, look, if I want to, improve my back-end operations in a warehouse, it's fine. AI fails. I mean, I lose some money. If AI fails in pharma biotech, somebody's life is at stake. So I mean, it's a huge, difference in context. Having said that, I personally believe that a lot of the regulatory authorities, a lot of the companies have been incredibly conservative in terms of their use of AI for these applications. Simple, it's one case in point, and this is one example I give a lot, which is somebody developed an AI, machine learning system to help doctors identify a particular form of cancer. Now, this is an extremely rare form of cancer, very, very hard to detect. So hard that even highly trained oncologists, highly trained doctors can detect it about 55% of the time, right? So their success rate in detecting this is about 55%. Well, we developed an AI that can detect this accurately 85% of the time compared to humans at 55. But guess what? This was rejected by the FDA because saying, well, how can we okay a system that's only 85% accurate? That's not good enough, right? So my point is, especially in pharma kinds of applications, there's a lot of headwinds that this kind of technology is facing. Again, where is AI hugely used in pharma and biotech? It's being used for medicine, for molecule discovery. Okay, all the big pharma companies I know are using massive amounts of machine learning to discover new molecules, not for the actual testing. That's still being done the old-fashioned way, right? The really expensive way. But the step before that, which is narrowing down thousands or maybe millions of molecules right down to perhaps 4 or 5 potentially useful ones. That's now being done using a lot of simulations and AI. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
And one question I got, it may not have been from Teo, but certainly over the course it's come up, is to what degree you see in specifically when you're dealing with such a personal topic like healthcare and biotech and clinical trial, the existence of clinical trials has been embedded from a regulatory perspective, which can add months, if not years, to a pharma adoption process. How much do now that you do have increased abilities to process simulation information, i.e. the AI machine learning pieces, to what extent can simulation take over actual trialing, and to what extent do we just can't substitute for biology?
So if you ask me this question from a pure scientific mathematical perspective, I will tell you that simulations and AI can take over manual trials today, purely from a mathematical perspective. Okay, they might actually end up giving you more accurate results than a live trial will, because obviously a live trial is insanely expensive and it's very, very limited to the kinds of people that you can run it on. Plus, if you want to have real double-blind trials, especially, it's an ethical issue. I mean, you're really giving somebody a sugar pill, telling them it's going to cure cancer, for example, right? Or with the understanding that this might cure cancer. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. So mathematically, I think it's possible today. Regulatory-wise, I don't see this happening. I think there will always be humans in the loop. This is not one of those things we'll be willing to turn over to AI in the foreseeable future, at least in my opinion. I don't see this happening. Very hard, yeah.
No, and it's interesting. I wonder how many other industries are going to be facing that dilemma.
Yeah.
And then how we deal with them from, regulation is just an outgrowth of evolved human sentiment, which is translated into, electoral expression and legislative appropriation and policy making, et cetera. Yeah. But it all starts with how somebody feels about a thing. And I agree with you. I think there's a skittishness when it comes to doctoring. I think because it's, the things we don't understand are the really, really big and the really, really small, right? So when it comes to the really, really small inside the human body, we just get comforted by having a human next to us, yep, helping us to understand that which we don't understand.
And ironically, I think possibly one way I see, it might actually be capitalism that helps AI in this particular process. Because look, again, if you want to draw the line between the West and the United States and Europe and some of the developed economies who are going to be really, really concerned about these things, versus somebody, again, for the lack of a better example, China. The Chinese are much more liable to say, screw this. Why do we need human trials? I'm just going to do it in the lab and launch this particular drug. And if they get really good at it, the cost pressures will either drive out the competition in the US, or it's going to force the folks in the US to adopt. Okay. Now, maybe the medical system is not the best example where something like this has happened, because it happens over very long periods of time. But think about applications of AI in other fields, right? Insurance or law or something like that. If a country or a particular industry or a particular company starts using it successfully, the others will be forced to follow. There won't be an alternative. It's capitalism at play. So maybe in some sense, capitalism might be the best bet, best help AI can get.
Interesting. And again, capitalism at its heart is a product of individual forms of expression. So it really, again, there's a lot of noise that happens between the transaction of that expression, whether it's a purchase or a sale or a vote or a consumer decision, and then the eventual regulatory policy that comes out of it. It is not a clean process by any means. But I agree. I think the consumer will, as it gets translated into both regulation but also money-making activity, will ultimately be our guide.
Yeah.
Oh,
All right. So I think the questions seem to have dried up by and large.
Yeah, no, I think we're at a point. This is the point where we usually will ask for a last round of questions anyway. So I do, again, to the participants. We're so pleased to have you with us this morning, and the questions have really been fantastic, and they've helped us to guide a discussion, which is exactly what these webinars are meant to do. It's live access to, especially to Dr. Joshi, whom we all see on the video, and it's nice to have the chance to interact, which we'll do 2 more times throughout the course as well.
Perfect.
So if there are any other final questions, we'll give about 10-20 seconds for any final questions to come through. Otherwise, we want to be respectful of your time. So Teo's got a question here, and then, as I said, while this is being answered, if there are any other questions, please ask them now, and we'll probably end in the next 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, choice models are very heavily used in the healthcare setting, actually. It's exactly like you said. One of the best uses of choice models is to actually understand the level of detailing that is required for a particular doctor, and to see if that detailing is actually paying off. So when I actually send my sales rep to detail a particular doctor, to promote a particular medicine or promote some new drugs and so on and so forth, all I can see at the end is, has the doctor prescribed that medication or not? It's a very yes or no kind of a question, which is perfect for choice models, as we have learned. So all of these big pharma companies or the agencies that run the detailing, they heavily depend on these choice models to actually understand what level of detailing works, what frequency of detailing works, what types of detailing works, and detailing combined with advertising. All possible combinations have been studied. As a matter of fact, there is a bunch of academic literature, I'm aware of it. This is from the period of 2003 to 2007. There's a lot of academic papers that in detail look at stuff like this, including the short-term effects of this, the long-term effects of this, the effects on patients, the effects on doctors, on insurance, all of it. Huge amount of study done on this, and most of it has been using some kind of choice models. So like I said, the choice models are extremely versatile, very, very versatile in their use. So hopefully that helps. All right, I guess, thank you very much, Felipe. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever in the world you are. But thank you even more so for putting in the effort to do the course. I know, it's all of us have other stuff to do. So it's really fantastic that you're taking this time to invest in yourself. And thank you very much for the team for making this possible. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No, and thank you, Dr. Joshi, for taking your time so generously. And this is always the most fun part of the course, this kind of direct interaction. So thank you all, and we will see you at future webinars, office hours, videos, and as usual, if there's something that is not answered in the framework of these scheduled discussions, please feel free to send emails to the course platform at any time. And we always have eyes on that inbox. So thanks, everyone. Program support, we can end the session now, and we just want to thank everyone once again and wish you all a wonderful rest of the week and weekend.
See you. Bye-bye. Thank you. See you next time.